Happy Halloween! It's time for another video game chronology. This time we are going to be looking into the chronology of Resident Evil. Before we begin talking about this chronology, there are a couple of things we need to take into consideration here. 1. Even with installments which are speculated not to have happened or extremely unpopular among fans, Capcom generally responds to comments by stating that those events could have happened, or at least some events. Thus, in this chronology, some of the less popular titles may also be included. All things considered, even the older games have alternate endings and events depending on the character and how the game is played. So, taking this into consideration, 100% of the events in all of the games taking place is out of the question to begin with, even if we were only to include the numbered games. 2. Not everything within with the title Resident Evil will be included. So, titles with no elements of story whatsoever, just simple remakes, without any new plot elements, the live-action movies and novelizations, which are for various reasons obviously outside the main chronology, and cameo appearances such as fighting games or party games, etc., will be excluded. Nevertheless, we will try to include all installments which have a relatively high possibility for official connection. First of all, let's go over the numbering titles, since those are mostly straightforward. We'll begin the list with the first Resident Evil, as well as Resident Evil 0, which takes place directly before the first Resident Evil, both in July of 1998. 2 months later, in September of 1998, we get to the Outbreak in Raccoon City, which sets the stage for both Resident Evil 2 and 3. Resident Evil 3 begins directly before 2 and ends directly after, so we can place these at approximately the same time after the first game. After this, we have the Resident Evil series begins to set its main titles during more modern times by placing Resident Evil 4 many years later, during autumn of 2004. Resident Evil 5 then comes, taking place in March of 2009. Resident Evil 6 spans both 2012 and 2013, depending on which part of the scenario is being played. And we do have a few extra contents, such as the Resident Evil 5's Lost in Nightmares, taking place in August of 2006, and Desperate Escape, which takes place during the final events of Resident Evil 5. Other non-game contents we'll bring up later. So aside from Resident Evil 2 and 3 intertwining, so far the timeline is fairly simple. Let's take a look. Next, we will take a look at a few sub-series which exist and their placement in the chronology. Code Veronica is the first game we'll look at. This game takes place during December of 1998, placing it a few months after Resident Evil 2 and 3, but still several years before Resident Evil 4. Then we have the Gun Survivor sub-series. The specific title names in the Western releases range from Survivor to Dead Aim, etc. These games, or the first game in this sub-series, Gun Survivor, takes place shortly before Code Veronica in November of 1998, with Gun Survivor 4 taking place in September of 2002, being well after Code Veronica, but still a couple years before Resident Evil 4. Gun Survivor 2 now is an odd game, since it is mostly actually a dream that Claire has while she rests in the VTOL, taking place directly after Code Veronica. And if you want to include a Gun Survivor 3 is even more of a strange game, since it's not a Resident Evil game, but actually a Dino Crisis game, so we'll leave Gun Survivor 3 out of the chronology for that reason. Next, let's take a look at one of the games which most people do not like to include in the actual chronology and take out of the canon series. This is Resident Evil Gaiden. Mainly because of the ending to this game, it's widely believed to be outside the official chronology of the series. However, if we ignore the ending, or are to believe that the events of the ending are quickly resolved, this game still matches up with the histories of both Leon and Barry. Also, it was written by Hiroki Kato, and supervised by Shinji Mikami, so until Capcom decides to officially say that this game is outside chronology, we'll keep it here in this list. Now, given the ages of the characters being the same in Resident Evil 1 and 2, as well as the information written in Wesker's report of Barry and Leon being in an underground organization while Chris is heading to Europe, so it's safest to say that Gaiden would take place shortly before Code Veronica, around the same time as the first Gun Survivor game. Next, we have Outbreak File 1 and File 2. The events of these games happened during the course of Resident Evil 2 and 3's time, during the period of September 1998, right before the destruction of Raccoon City. Spoiler warning. Obviously, not all of the events for all of the characters can be taking place simultaneously, but the characters, places, and overarching events could easily be considered to have happened. Next, we have Operation Raccoon City, another very unpopular game. This tells us certain events happening during the time of Resident Evil 2 and 3, Like the previously mentioned games, this is often one fans like to ignore due to certain interactions with Leon, which could contradict the timeline of 2. But, like with Outbreak, we can assume that while not 100% of these events are actually taking place, some of them very well could have. Next, we have the Chronicles subseries. This is somewhat hard to play since it covers so many time periods at once, and like many other installments, it consists of various changes from the original settings. But, simply put, Umbrella Chronicles covers the events of 0, 1, and 3, as well as new events, and Darkside Chronicles covers 2 and Code Veronica, as well as a new episode. For the sake of chronological order, we will only include the new episodes here, and taking them into account, as others are mostly retellings of existing events. This leaves us with the Umbrella Chronicles taking place in February of 2003, and Darkside Chronicles being earlier in 2002. The Revelations subseries includes the first Revelations, which covers time periods between Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5's Lost in Nightmares in 2004 and 2005, and the upcoming Resident Evil Revelations 2 is mostly events set in 2011, after Resident Evil 5 but prior to Resident Evil 6. Okay, we still have a lot to cover in this chronology, but let's stop and take a look at how the chronology has come together so far. And we're going to cut off the video once here, and we'll pick up with the remaining chronological details in the second part.